Hear that? There it is. Mohan Veena. I'm going to share a little bit about these two beautiful Indian slide guitars. One being the style of the Mohan Veena, created by Baba Sindhu Bishwas, the maker, and Vishwa Mohan Bhatt, the musician and one of the pioneers of Indian slide music. The other is following my teacher Debashish Bhattacharya, who is also another major exponent of the Indian slide guitar, and his version is called the Chattarangi. So I'm going to demonstrate a little bit about these two instruments, both made by the same maker, Baba Sindhu, the Concord, who passed away recently, early this year. And I'm just going to demonstrate a few pros and cons about each of the styles and compare a little bit of the sound qualities, such as the sympathetic strings, the resonant strings, from one being on the side and one being underneath. Let's start with the Mohan Veena, as it was one of the original creations of this Indian slide guitar, one of the original hybrids. Firstly, the Indian slide guitar is an adaptation of the Hawaiian slide. It came through Calcutta in, say, the 50s, 60s, and when they heard that sliding, that gliding sound, the Indians, obviously loving that sound between the notes, decided to adopt it into their traditional and classical music. And thus, with a few extra modifications, such as the sympathetic strings, the rhythmic strings, the chikari, like a sitar or veena, the Mohan Veena was born. So this one is following the typical playing style of Vishwa Mohan Bhatt. It's got three main strings, and then a few drone strings and some chikari rhythmic strings. The sympathetic strings are directly underneath the main central strings here, and in this way the Mohan Veena has a louder resonance with the sympathetic strings resonating to the main. Basically, because they're directly underneath, it's very easy for it to pick up on the Jawadi bridge, and you get a more full resonance, which I'm going to try and demonstrate. Did you hear the undertone there? It's like a little shadow note. The strings, the main strings also are quite they're quite wide, they're quite spaced apart, and this allows for an easier sense of precision between the slide when moving up and down the frets, up and down the strings. And I've noticed by simply playing louder and faster in the more high rhythmical aspects that because there's less strings, there's less overall clash of noise while doing the sliding. So basically the sounds that you're focused on with the slide will come out more clear with the other open tuning still giving it some support. The Chattarangi style, which I'm also very blessed to have in my possession, because this was one of the last instruments that Baba Sindhuji created for me before he actually passed away. So I feel very privileged that I have one of his last works, which was also a design that I asked him to make because he's mostly specializing in the Mohan Veena, but because I have studied with Debashish and enjoy the style of Chattarangi, I specifically asked him to create me one model of the Chattarangi, which he seemed to be very pleased about as well. So as you can see, it's got a wider neck to allow the top chikari strings, for example, which are not present there, following Debashish's playing style. It has a full 6 strings body. So you get that full 6-string effect like a normal guitar or Hawaiian slide, just allowing a little bit more spectrum between the high notes and the bass notes. It's got 2 drone strings at the bottom, so I switch between the drones here and the rhythmic strings, and then the major difference being that the sympathetic strings are out on the side, allowing for more easy access. They're not quite in tune here, so I'm going to tune them up in a little bit and demonstrate a little bit of the playing style between the instruments. But yeah, one argument is that the resonant strings here, the sympathetics, are not quite as prominent in picking up the major strings as the Mohan Veena. So basically, they're not going to be as loud in the natural ability for them to just resonate as much as the Mohan Veena will pick up and just really accent and emphasize a quite strong field of resonance on the overall. But they still do pick up, and as long as you can tune the instrument accordingly to itself, then both instruments should have the ability to resonate and give some level of this Indian mystical kind of sound and vibration. Resonating on the sa strings, the natural tonic, the D, which I'm tuned to at the moment. But if I wanted to specify and get more resonance with the other strings, such as the pa, the A, or the F sharp, then I could go into the sympathetic strings and I could perhaps make 2 A's in the 12 strings of the sympathetics. So now I've got sa ni da pa. So there's one pa there, the A. and another pa here. So I'm giving myself two more notes of the same key, A, to try and encourage this resonance to happen a little bit more prominently. So I'm tuning both the main strings and the sympathetic strings here, just tweaking them very, very slightly, because that's all it takes, very slight adjustments. There we go. And you'll notice that I've played it 3 times now, yet it hasn't come every time. So perhaps a little bit more slight adjustments. And it's coming on the second string too. So the sympathetic strings now are tuned to sa ni da pa ma ga re sa ni da pa. I hope you hear that. Starting to get a nice resonance. And in this way, whatever scale that you're playing in, you tune those sympathetic strings according to that scale, and you tune the instrument to itself. Whatever key, whatever pitch, whatever frequency, make that very, very, very solid, and then tune the sympathetic strings accordingly, and you will start to hear the resonance. But take your time with it. So we're going to now do the same thing with the Mohan Veena. The open strings, nice resonance. And there is one other dependent factor, is that these are older strings. This is a brand new instrument. It's got new strings. New strings are obviously going to sound a little bit more vibrant, a little bit clearer, so do bear that in mind in the overall comparison here. Yeah, just listen to that, just rings out instantly. I did tune this instrument prior to this shooting, but they are in the sun. It is a new instrument. It is getting to know what its tension gauge is. And the fine adjustments is where the resonant magic is going to happen. It's always going to be in this fine tweaking. So the Mohan Veena, to get to the sympathetics, you have to go through the main string. So you can make a little gap, and if you have the finger picks, then that's where you can still do the full scale plucking and get that nice descending sa ni da pa ma ga re sa effect. But when I'm tuning on a Mohan Veena style, I like to jump right to where the machine heads are kind of coming into, so I know exactly which one's which, because it can be very confusing otherwise. And I just play right next to that area. So that's a slight adjustment. Let's see if we got any resonance yet. Yeah, a little bit of resonance coming. So the tunings are exactly the same, aside there's only 3 main strings here, but the sympathetic strings are still tuned to the same descending scale, which is just the major scale, major notes. We're starting to hear some resonance coming into form. Let's try the pa. There we go. Just a slight adjustment. So I'm finding the same note, the A, the pa. A little bit of resonance. Coming a little bit late, but it's still there. It's still catching itself. And this instrument is literally brand new. It's going to take a little bit of time for the jawadi, for the whole tension to really start to adjust. And then it will mature in age and become much more resonant with itself over course time. So the fact that it is resonating quite well now is a really good sign that it's going to find that. And a good point for anybody that's just about to jump into this journey of perhaps investing in an Indian slide guitar or deciding between the two, for example, is to also understand that just because, for example, this instrument has more strings, it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be a better instrument. They're two very different playing styles, and sometimes the very famous principle of less is more can be quite true, especially if you're beginning something like this instrument, because the aspect of tuning is going to really come into play, and over time you're going to be quite overwhelmed with having to tune so many strings regularly, and hearing the fact that it sounds a little bit off, because they do change, especially, for example, it's in the sunlight now, the wood's going to warm up, the tuning's going to shift. And if you're not aware of that, it's not going to sound as beautiful as you might hope or expect, as it normally does. Also, the fact that there are a lot of strings, it means that you have to actually become more familiar, not just with the tuning, but with the whole overall scale of running up and down the fretboard. Whereas something that's a little bit less, it's going to actually make the initial phase of playing the instrument far more fluid, far more easier, and probably why Vishwa Mohan Bhatt has opted out of the full 6 strings, because of course he would have played all 6 strings at many different times of his life, but then actually dropped and reduced until he found the sound he was looking for, found the range of sound that he felt was enough, that he was content with, a little bit of bass, some treble on the high end, and then he's really been able to develop that to such a point that he was one of the greatest musicians of India for a period of time. My teacher Debashish has always enjoyed that full spectrum of sound, and thus he's kept the full 6 strings and always made use of that. So it really depends on where you want to go, and of course you can always reduce strings on either the Chattarangi style or add strings to the Mohan Veena style. They're both not limited to as what you see now. The last thing that I'll mention is that this has just got one of these gourds here. It's more for aesthetic and design purposes than any other thing. I could have one on the Mohan Veena too, but they don't actually amplify the sound, which is what the traditional Veena had that purpose for. They're more just an aesthetic or a prop so that it sits up nicely for playing. Yeah, that's again just a personal preference. This instrument has not been fitted with the screw device which allows you to put the gourd on, but it's following the traditional Mohan Veena. So I'm just going to do a little quick demonstration of the playing on both of these instruments. I'm using my symbolic signature crystal slide, the Himalayan quartz crystal. I'm just going to mention that I've chosen this because it's small enough that I can still play quickly, yet big enough that it creates a nice sustain on the instrument and a nice tone that I've become very familiar with. The bigger the shape, crystal or stone or egg or whatever, the more sustain you will get, but the harder you'll find to actually play with some level of speed and precision. And the smaller, the less sustain, but the faster that you can play. This is just a general rule of thumb that I'm speaking, because I've tried many different things, including, of course, the steel bars and different glass rods. So we're going to test out on the Mohan Veena first now. Nice open sound. the Mohan Veena. Moving to the Chattarangi. So notice that I've already started playing the sympathetic notes. Because of the sun, it's already gone a little bit out of tune, which is why before we actually play, anytime before we play, we quickly give it a once over. Only slightly, but it's enough that you would hear it's out of tune if you're perceptive. And I'm going to attempt to play pretty much the same scale and the same kind of vibe that I was just playing to give an accurate contrast. Sympathetic strings, the tariff, ascending. So basically I'm just opening the top here with my left hand, 2 fingers, so I can really get a wide sweep. Then opening the second layer. Then with my thumb for descending, same thing, but a little bit easier because you get that nice descending glide with the thumb pick. If I want to get the whole range of motion, then I have to kind of tuck it a little bit further back. There's a few strings a little bit out of tune, but just for the idea that I can still get the full sweep if I get this backwards kind of angle. A little bit faster. So that's just opening the center there and really kind of going both directions from the full angle. So you still have access to them, but of course you can't play those strings and then still play them at the same time. You kind of have to open it up, but you still can get the resonance kind of ringing on top just by muting the middle two and letting the others ring out. Nice resonance. Woo! Hear that? Now she's singing. I'm Shivam. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. See you again.